Some homes carry a quiet elegance that you can feel immediately when you walk inside. The home may not be large or expensive, but it's composed in a way that makes the entire space feel calm, balanced, and intentional. And yet some women spend years thoughtfully furnishing and decorating their homes without ever quite achieving that feeling. The furniture may be beautiful, the rooms carefully arranged, but something about the space still feels slightly off, as though the pieces never fully come together in the way we imagined. Often, the reason is that elegance in a home rarely comes from individual decorating decisions alone. More often, it comes from understanding a few underlying design principles that show how a space actually works and how it is experienced. Once you begin to see these principles clearly, something shifts. The mystery behind that quiet sense of elegance begins to make sense, and the choices that shape a home start to feel much more intentional. Welcome back to Gracefully Lori. I'm Lori. If you're new here, this channel is for women who want to live authentically, express themselves with intention, and move through the world with quiet, modern grace. Today we're going to look at 7 design principles that quietly shape homes that feel elegant and composed. These are not complicated decorating rules or trends. They simply help women understand why certain homes feel balanced and effortless. One of the easiest places to begin seeing these principles is in the rooms that never quite seem to work the way we expect them to. So principle number 1, have you ever had a room that just doesn't come together? A space where you rearrange the furniture several times, trying different layouts, yet something still feels slightly off. The sofa works in one direction, but blocks the natural path through the room. A chair appears to belong somewhere, but wherever you place it, the space just feels a little awkward. The furniture itself may be beautiful. The pieces may be well chosen and thoughtfully arranged. Yet the room never quite settles into what you pictured. Often, the tension has less to do with the layout than with something much more fundamental. Every room has an underlying structure created by the architecture of the space, the proportions of the walls, the placement of doors and windows, and the natural pathways people take through the room. Those elements quietly determine which arrangements will feel comfortable and which feel slightly forced. To align the structure of the room itself, the scale of the furniture needs to relate to the size of the space, and the arrangement should allow people to move comfortably through the room rather than navigating around obstacles. For example, if a doorway naturally creates a pathway across the room, a layout usually works best if you keep that path open rather than placing furniture directly in its path. If a room is long and narrow, the furniture will usually follow the natural length of the space rather than trying to force a wide arrangement that makes the room feel crowded. Because I own a townhome, one of my personal design challenges is small bedrooms. So I use taller, skinnier furniture, I manage mirrors and light strategically, and I utilize lighter color paint, flooring, and decor. Our eyes naturally follow the strongest lines in a space. So when those emphasize height or openness, the entire room begins to feel more expansive. When the layout begins to cooperate with the architecture in this way, something shifts in the room. The furniture settles more comfortably into place, the room becomes easier to use, and the entire space begins to feel calmer and more balanced. Once a room begins to feel settled within its own structure, something else becomes noticeable as you move through the home. Principle 2. Sometimes you walk into a home where each room is lovely on its own, yet the overall space never feels quite connected. The living room feels warm and inviting, but when you step into the next room, the atmosphere suddenly changes. Perhaps the colors shift dramatically, or the materials feel completely unrelated. Each room may be attractive individually, but moving through the house begins to feel like entering a series of different environments. Many people approach decorating this way without realizing it. Each room becomes a new project, a new palette, a new mood, a new set of decisions. But elegant homes often approach the house as a whole rather than as a collection of separate rooms. Certain colors appear again in softer ways as you move through the home. Materials repeat themselves subtly from one space to the next. The palette evolves instead of restarting completely. For example, a warm neutral tone used in the living room might appear again in a hallway rug or in the upholstery of a chair in the next room. These connections are often subtle, but they create a quiet sense of continuity. In my home, I try to echo textures and accents throughout my house, but the easiest way I've created continuity has been through my overall color palette. I have 3 main colors used throughout the house, and I use these colors differently based on the room. In one room, a color may be the primary wall color, but in another, I may use it as an accent. When I place color cards next to each other, they look cohesive because they have the same undertones and similar saturation, value, and/or density. When I built a color palette around one of those colors, it worked naturally well with the rest of the house. A home with visual cohesion avoids fragmentation, so moving through the space feels calm and natural. As that sense of continuity develops, another subtle tension begins to disappear inside individual rooms. But before we continue, if you're finding this video valuable, please consider liking the video and subscribing. Doing so helps get this video distributed to others who may want to see it. Now, back to our design principles. Principle number 3. Sometimes a room looks beautiful, yet something about it still feels slightly off. One corner of the room may feel crowded, while another feels strangely empty. A large piece of furniture seems to dominate the space while smaller pieces disappear. Nothing is technically wrong with the furniture itself. Each piece may be lovely on its own, yet together, the room never quite feels composed. Many people try to fix this by adding more items, another chair, a side table, perhaps a decorative piece on a nearby surface. But often the issue isn't that something is missing. Instead, it has to do with proportion. Elegant rooms tend to pay close attention to how the scale of the furniture relates to the scale of the room itself. Larger pieces provide structure and visual weight, while smaller pieces support the arrangement without competing for space. I'll be honest, I struggle with this the most. Sometimes I fall in love with a piece of furniture and try to figure out how I can place it in my house regardless of the actual scale and fit. In fact, I recently spent weeks trying to figure out how to place a piece I really wanted, but in the end, it wasn't meant to be. One item was not worth disturbing the balance I had created throughout my house. When the proportions begin to align with the size and the shape of the room, something shifts. The room begins to feel composed rather than slightly chaotic. Once the proportions of the space feel balanced, another element quietly begins to influence how the room feels. Principle 4. Have you ever entered a room that somehow feels slightly harsh or strangely flat? Sometimes the overhead light feels too bright, almost exposing every surface in the room. Other times, certain corners seem to disappear into shadow, while the others feel overly illuminated. You might add a lamp or adjust the fixture, hoping the atmosphere will improve. Yet the room still doesn't feel as comfortable as you expected. Often the issue isn't the brightness, it's how the light is distributed. Elegant homes tend to treat lighting as something that shapes the atmosphere of a room rather than simply making it visible. Instead of relying on a single overhead light source, the light is layered throughout the space. A lamp near a chair creates a warm pool of light for reading. Another lamp softens the edge of the room. Natural light from windows fills the space during the day. When light comes from several sources, the room begins to feel softer and more dimensional. Certain areas invite you to sit and stay a while, and the overall atmosphere becomes warmer and more comfortable. For me, I also pay attention to the temperature of the lighting sources in the room. The temperature does not need to be the same across the room, but it does need to meet the needs of the individual area of the room as well as the room collectively. Here's a tip. If you want highly customizable lighting, you may want to look into adjustable bulbs. Once the light in a room begins to feel balanced, another kind of richness begins to appear in the space. Principle 5. Sometimes a room can be beautifully arranged and well lit, yet it still feels slightly flat. The colors may work together perfectly. The furniture is thoughtfully chosen, but the room somehow lacks depth. Often this happens when the materials in the room all behave the same way. Smooth fabrics, polished surfaces, and similar finishes can make a room feel coordinated, but sometimes also a little too uniform. Elegant spaces often introduce subtle variety in the materials and the textures they use. Wood next to fabric, linen next to leather, a soft rug against a smooth floor. Each material reflects light differently and adds a layer of visual richness. These variations don't add clutter. Instead, they create depth. The room begins to feel layered rather than flat. This is my favorite part of decorating. I love seeing how different materials and textures play with each other in a space. In one room, I have 6 or 7 different textures, and they play beautifully together. The key, making sure the textures are not competing with each other visually. And once a room begins to feel layered in this way, another design principle quietly begins to organize the entire space. Principle 6. Sometimes a room contains beautiful objects, yet it still feels visually busy. Artwork, decorative objects, furniture pieces. Each one may be interesting on its own, but together they begin to compete for attention. The eyes move quickly around the room without ever quite settling. Elegant rooms often resolve this by allowing one or two pieces to quietly anchor the space. This might be a beautiful cabinet, a striking chair, or a piece of artwork that naturally draws the eye. Once that anchor exists, the other elements in the room can support it rather than compete with it. Instead of everything trying to stand out, the room begins to feel calm and intentional. And once the room has that sense of structure, everything else begins to emerge. Principle 7. Some homes are beautifully designed, yet still feel strangely impersonal. The furniture is stylish, the colors are carefully chosen, yet the space doesn't quite reveal anything about the people who live there. In contrast, many elegant homes feel unmistakably personal, not cluttered or overly decorated, but quietly reflective of the people and the lives being lived there. Books that have been clearly read, objects collected over time, pieces chosen because they hold meaning. These elements give the home character. They remind us that elegance isn't about perfection. It's about creating a space that feels thoughtful and lived in. When you step back and look at homes that feel effortlessly elegant, it's rarely one dramatic feature that creates that impression. Instead, it's the quiet interaction of many thoughtful decisions. The way the architecture guides the layout, the way rooms connect to one another, the balance of the furnishings, the warmth of the lighting, the richness of materials, the presence of an anchor or anchors, and the personal details that bring the space to life. Once you begin noticing these principles, something interesting starts happening. You start to see them everywhere, and the choices you make in your own home begin to feel far more intentional. If you enjoyed exploring these design principles with me, please consider liking the video and subscribing. I'd love to have you join us here on the channel, and others would have a better chance of seeing this video and perhaps benefiting from it. Also, if you have any design challenges you struggle with, or a tip that I can learn from, I'd love to hear in the comments. Until next time, my graceful friends.